Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
In the previous session, we introduced the subject of mutakallimin and how the topic of Qadaa wal Qadr, along with many other topics, emerged. And today, inshallah, we'll be picking up from there and discussing the issues that are related to it and going straight into the topic, inshallah. If one was to come to an accurate understanding of the subject of Qadaa wal Qadr, he must first have an understanding of the correct basis upon which the argument is built. This basis should not be whether the actions of man are created by himself or by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is also not the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ilmullah, in terms of the fact that he subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that man will perform such an action and that his subhanahu wa ta'ala knowledge encompasses it. Nor is it the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, iradatullah, in terms that his subhanahu wa ta'ala decree was related to the servant's action. That is, that the action must happen because of this will. It also shouldn't be that the servant's action is recorded in the Allahul Mahfuz protected decree or register. So as a result, he is inevitably going to carry out this action in accordance with what is recorded. Indeed, the basis upon which the subject is built is neither of these matters, since they have no relationship to the subject in terms of reward and punishment. They are rather related to the subject in terms of creation, the knowledge that encompasses everything, and the will of the Creator, which is related to all the possible matters and the inclusion in Allahul Mahfuz of everything. This relationship is detached from the subject of reward and punishment for the action. In other words, is man compelled to perform an action, good or bad, or does he have a choice? And does man have the choice to perform an action or abandon it, or does he not have the choice? In the previous session, we explained that the whole basis of this topic, the way it started, it came from, it's a matter discussed by the by the Greek philosophers, between the Stoics and the Epicureans. And they had two views. The Epicureans said that man controls his actions, therefore he created it. And the reason is due to the issue of justice. And the Stoics said that man does not control his action because he didn't create those actions. When the Muslims came across this, they tried answering it from an Islamic perspective, yet they were influenced by the methodology of the Greek philosophers. And as we mentioned, this brought about the topic of the referred to as ilmul kalam. One of the problems was that the mutakallimin addressed Greek philosophical topics by comparing them to unfitting Islamic concepts. Hence, for instance, they wrongly brought up topics like iradatullah and ilmullah, or the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is because they took the meaning of words that were given by the Greek philosophers and tried comparing it with the meaning of the words in Arabic. And hence they addressed it in a very wrong way. Now, the point I'm making here is that the Muslims were aware that this topic is a rational one. Yet, they needed to find a foundation, a basis for it in Islam. For instance, if you are discussing the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will still find the discussion of whether that there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not in the Quran or the Hadith. So they wanted to find a way of explaining these topics from an Islamic perspective. But what I just said is actually wrong, in the sense that that's what they wanted, meaning that's what they wished for, that's what they hoped. But the path they followed, the methodology of inquiry that they followed was the total opposite. It was in contradiction to their aims and objectives at the time. This is because whilst they wanted to have an Islamic view on these matters, they went on and followed the methodology that was not Islamic. So you see, that's a bit of this is a huge contradiction actually, because you might say that it's quite confusing how that transpired. But we can see the result is that they ended up providing the same answers that the Greek philosophers gave. It then becomes clear that what they wanted to do was to choose, what they ended up doing rather was choosing between the view of the Epicureans and the view, between the view of the Epicureans and the view of the Stoics. Hence, they did this because of their confusion, because their confusion came from mixing Islam with alien thoughts. The whole discussion of Qadaa and Qadr then became centered on the creation of actions and effects, because the discussion was that, does man create his action or does he not? Rather, is man compelled to carry out an action or is he not compelled to carry out? Meaning, does man control his action or does he not? Those that said man controls his action, they said that since the condition is that man has to be the one that whoever controls actions is the one that created it, they said then there's no way that man didn't create his action, because to them it's obvious that man created his action. So the Mu'tazila followed this view, and the others, the Stoics, said no, man does not control his action. And the Jabriya, when they came, they said no, there's no way man controls his action, because the text says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man's actions. And therefore, they ended up following another Greek philosophical view. Now, before we go into this, what I want to do regarding this topic is to first explain the correct understanding of Al-Qadaa wal-Qadr. Then we can go in and read it from the book, because it seems like reading the long explanation from the book, it's not that it's confusing, but for most people, it confuses them, because there are quite a lot of examples and a lot of points made within a very short paragraph. Okay, because for this topic, the way it's explained in the Humble Islam, it's actually a precise presentation of it. But trust me, it's actually enough to understand it. So what I want to do is first explain the correct view, then we go into it in the book. But before I do that, I want us to see this. This is the view of the Mutakallim. Long view will help us. Where did they come from? Meaning, like, what did they say, and where did their views come from? Okay, if you look at it, you will see that the view of the Mu'tazila came from the angle of the actions themselves, of carrying out the action itself, whereas the view of the Jabriya came from the angle of creation. So the angles that led to their conclusions were actually different. The Mu'tazila were looking at the aspect of the consequence of carrying out an action. Should man be rewarded or punished for his actions? If man is going to be punished for committing a sin, and if we say that he is compelled to carry out that action, then how is it fair to punish him for that? So if Abu Lahab was compelled to become a kafir, meaning because it has been determined that he is a kafir, then how is it fair to judge him and even punish him for that? So the Mu'tazila came from the angle of the actions, from the perspective of the actions and the consequence of those actions themselves. Is it meaning from the angle of whether there is reward or punishment for such an action? Whereas the Jabriya and the Ahlus Sunnah, they came from the angle of the creation of the action itself. So they said that man did not create his action. Therefore, man does not control his action. Now we have to remember that this whole conversation about al-Qadaa wal-Qadr by the Greek philosophers had this precept. The precept is that if the person that created something controls it, the entity that creates something controls it. Man built computers, therefore he can control computers. Okay, so if man did not create his actions, there is no way he will be the one controlling it. So the Jabriya come from the angle of the verse that says Wallahu khalaqakum wa ma ta'malun, whereas the Mu'tazila come from the angle of the actions itself. And which is what we we explained the problem with this kind of mentality in the previous session, and this is the result of it. We explained that the problem with the Greek philosophical methodology of syllogism is that it gives you conditions that could lead to what seems like the truth, but in reality it's not true, because it could also lead to a contradictory view, and in the end the conditions of the truth are not even correct to themselves, meaning they are not rational, they are not acceptable. So in the end, the Mutakallimin reached these views we are seeing on the screen now. The Mu'tazila said what al-Qadaa means is that man carries out his actions. Okay? And what al-Qadr means to them is the effects of the actions that were created by man. They said that the actions were carried out by man, and the effects of the actions were created by man. Therefore, man created his actions. And the Jabriya, and effectively the Ahlul Sunnah, said that Qadaa means man does not control his actions. And they said Al-Qadr means the effects of actions were not created by man, since the actions themselves were not created by man. Therefore, man is compelled to carry out the action. Now, there is a bit of a confusion where some think that the view of the Ahlul Sunnah is closer to the view of the Mu'tazila, or it's actually unique. Rather, it's closer to the view of the Jabriya, because it was the view, and may Allah reward them for their efforts and forgive them for the mistakes, is that they wanted to reconcile between the view of the Mu'tazila and the Jabriya. So they took from the Mu'tazila the issue of man being judged fairly. So they said man has this khasb ikhtiyari, where he initiates the action by wishing to do it. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compels him to carry out that action. So you see, it's a mixture of the view of the Mu'tazila and the Jabriya, but effectively it's actually the same as the view of the Jabriya. Now, since we have now seen what they understand of al-Qadr, both the two views, because there are only two views, not three, and what they understand of the word Qadr, let's understand something. If you look at their arguments, both camps, you'll see that they cite verses from the Quran and a hadith from the Sunnah, and they take these evidences that mention the word Qadaa or Qadr to establish their arguments. And sometimes they even quote verses that contradict their views, because in origin they did not reach their views via those verses. They reached them after choosing one of the Greek philosophical views, and then they source-mined. Source-mining is the act of, you have chosen a view, now let me find an evidence to back it up. Okay? That's what they ended up doing, even if it was not their intention. Hence, they ended up quoting evidences that would eventually be contradictory or would not be related to the topic of discussion at all. In order to understand this, let's understand that when the words al-Qadaa wal-Qadr emerged in the Quran and Hadith, they were not intended their usage was not intended for the adoption of it in the phrase al-Qadaa wal-Qadr. Meaning when it said al-Qadaa or al-Qadr in the verses of the Quran, they were not used to give the same meaning that al-Qadaa wal-Qadr gave. Okay, so if we look at the meanings that al-Qadaa came in the Quran and Hadith, because it's a homonym, it's a word that has several meanings. So in some places it means making that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the thing with precision. In some places it means to execute a matter and to make a thing. In some places it means he ordered. He gave an order, or he completed a matter, or he made the existence of a matter inevitable, or he settled a matter, or he finished the matter and he ruled upon it, and he gave a definite matter. These are the meanings that the word al-Qadaa came with. You can see that they differ. They are different meanings that apply to different circumstances, but it is the same word. And you can see that this word has nothing to do with compelling or not compelling man to carry out an action. They have to do with the Creator himself, on him saying that he has executed a matter, or he has determined a matter with precision, meaning he has made it with precision, not determined, or he has brought something into existence and made it inevitable, or something like that. You see, it has nothing to do with making someone carry out an action or not making him to carry out an action. As for al-Qadr, it's also a homonym word, meaning it's a word that has several meanings. Amongst its meanings is taqdir, meaning to determine, determination. Ilm, when the word al-Qadr is used in some places, it means ilm, knowledge. In some places, it means arrange something, arrangement. In some places, it is time, al-waqt. That's what al-Qadr means. In some places, it means and in some places it means to an attribute. The usage of the mutakallimin has nothing to do with any of this. From al-Qadaa to al-Qadr, the way they used the words has nothing to do with any of these meanings. This is because the origin of the discussion was the origin of the discussion discussed the allusions that had these view. This topic of Qadaa wal Qadr has also been called al-Jabr wal-Ikhtiyar, and there is another name for it, Hurriyatul Irada. Yes. That dominate and determine the views of the of the two schools of thought that discussed it. Now, moving forward, I'm sorry if this is getting boring. I'm reaching somewhere. I'm reaching somewhere. Okay, so so these are the meanings that it came in the text. And we have mentioned that these meanings in no way apply to the original discussion that was done by the Greek philosophers. If one was to take a close look at the topic or the discussion, it has to do with just these questions. Does man control his action, or does he not? Does man control his action, or does he not? But because the mutakallimin placed a wrong condition, the Greek philosophers, the philosophers in their syllogical methodology placed a wrong condition that says whoever creates an action controls it. And this was what led to the main confusion about it all. Now, we have discussed the wrong view. Okay? Now, let's look at the correct view. First, so let's dissect al-Qadaa wal-Qadr. And before we do this, I'll actually... Okay, so I said I won't read from the book until I explain it, okay? Because I want this to be clear as much as possible. If we look at man's action, now let's forget about the word al-Qadaa or al-Qadr for a moment, okay? If we look at man's actions, we will see that one sphere man submits to a certain sphere, and the other sphere, it submits to man. What does it mean for what do we mean by this sphere? Okay, what it means is that who influences who, meaning what influences what. Okay, does man influence circumstances, or do circumstances influence him? So we say that if you look at his actions, you will see that there are aspects that man dominates, that's the word that was used in the book. But I use the word submit because dominates indicates that it might indicate to some that it means the sphere that dominates man means it compels man to carry out an action, and that's not what it means. The sphere that dominates man, which is what I refer to here as the sphere that man submits to, because he actually submits to it. That's what it means for the sphere to dominate him. And what that means is that man does not control whatever happens within that sphere. He carries out his actions, but he does not control its outcome or anything that has to do with it. Now, I'm not going to treat this right now. Okay, I'm not going to treat this right now. We'll be treating it way ahead in the book. This is the most important part. Okay, this is the most important part now. Okay, so this sphere that dominates man, or rather, as I used here, the sphere that man submits to, is also divided into two. So let's back up a little bit. We said that if you look at man's actions, you'll see that there is a sphere that influences man's actions, and there is a sphere that man influences, meaning there is a sphere that dominates man's actions, and there is a sphere that man dominates. And we will explain why it is said that it actually dominates man's actions. But I'm saying right now that it does not mean it forces man to carry out an action. Okay? It does not mean that. And the reason is because if you look at this sphere, the sphere that man submits to, meaning that dominates man, you'll find out it's also divided into two. The first is the law of the universe, and the second is the outcomes of our actions, the result of our actions. What law of the universe means is that, for instance, man cannot fly, man did not choose the shape of his head, man cannot live underwater without, a box of oxygen, a cylinder of oxygen rather. Man cannot phase through a wall, meaning I cannot just decide, just because I wish it, I cannot walk through a wall. These are things in Arabic that are called sunnatullah, or as we call it in English, law of the universe. And this particular part is the reason why we say that this sphere dominates man. This is because the dominance that is referred to here is that man organizes his actions according to these natural laws. It's because man knows he cannot fly like Superman. That's why he decides to take a car or a horse or a bicycle or a bike, or a plane to travel or to reach destinations. His actions in this case are not compelled by these natural laws. Rather, they influence his decision making. Okay? So because man knows he cannot walk through a wall, he always has a door in his house. He knows that air cannot easily pierce through the wall, so he has windows in his house. You see, his man comes up with means and styles that are in accordance with natural laws. That's why it is said that man has nothing to do with this, because he cannot change them. Therefore, he submits to them. What submission means is not that they influence his actions. No. Just because I cannot walk through a wall doesn't mean it forces me to make a French door or an American door. No, it just means that it influences my decision. It influences our decisions to have a door in our houses. Okay, to decide, should I trek to this location, or should I take a motorcycle, or should I take a car, or should I take a plane, or should I take a train, or should I take a boat? Okay, that's what it means to have a natural law, meaning they are conditions that man did not create, that man did not establish. Man found them the way they are. Therefore, he organizes his actions accordingly. Okay, so man cannot change the fact that there is day and night. Hence, usually in the night, we want to have lights everywhere. In the day, we have the sun and it's kind of enough. So you find that people do not turn on the lights inside their houses. But wait a minute, just because the sun is up in the sky, does it mean it forces you not to turn on the light on your roof? No, you can decide to turn it on, waste energy, and you have to pay a lot of money for it. You see, this has nothing to do with compelling you. It's just that you organize your actions accordingly. And of course, there are actions that you can decide to carry out but are not possible for you to make happen. For instance, just because it is said that man cannot fly, it doesn't mean you cannot attempt to fly. You should go to the tallest building in your town, and you can decide to go to the tallest building in your town and jump and test whether you can fly. You can make that decision and you can actually attempt to fly. But the law of universe saying that you can't fly, what it means is that you don't have the ability to fly. Hence, you won't be able to do so. But it doesn't mean just because you can't fly, you can't make the decision not to fly. It doesn't mean that. Because then humans would have been perfect. Because the law of universe is perfect. Unlike us humans, we are not perfect. The law of universe is perfect. There is no way the law of universe will glitch where I can walk through a wall. There's no way the law of universe will glitch where the night turns into day, or it turns into something, or the rain stops because you want it to stop, or it rains because you have a farm. It doesn't glitch. So it's a perfect rule. And that's why we submit to it. Not because we can't attempt to break it. No, we can actually attempt. It's just that we are absolutely sure attempting to break it doesn't mean you can break that law. And that's what the law of the universe means. And for your information, the law of the universe is what we study in schools like physics, chemistry, mainly actually physics. And chemistry and biology, by the way. And we will come to that, inshallah, as well. So when you study friction, laws of motion, Newton, and so, Newton and his laws of motion, and Einstein and stuff like that, you're actually studying laws of the universe, because you need to understand how all these things behave, how they operate perfectly, so that you will come up with something that will operate within that law of universe. Because you should know that if I attempt to invent a time traveling machine, I would forever be wasting my time. If I try to invent a pill that will make me immortal, I will forever be wasting my time. Now, here is why you need Iman, because it guides you in this kind of things. Because you would think people that study science should know that you cannot invent a time traveling machine, but because they don't have Iman, they keep doing it. And that's why we say that Iman regulates everything. Okay? So this is the first aspect of al-Qadaa. By the way, this is al-Qadaa. These two things, they are al-Qadaa. That's what we mean. This is the correct view of al-Qadaa. So this is the first aspect of it. The law of the universe. They are matters you have nothing to do with. You operate within them. Okay? It's law of the universe that the that gravity forces you down. No matter how high you jump, it forces you down. You might wish to float or something like that, to levitate, but you won't be able to do it, not because you don't want to. Now, you see why in the previous session I said that the view that if man wishes to do something, then he is able to do it, is actually quite, it's wrong in so many ways, because if my wish would enable me to carry out an action, then I would want to fly. I'd want to live on the sea. I'd want to be able to walk through the wall. Now, so the law of the universe is one of the two types of things that fall under al-Qadaa, because man has nothing to do with them. The second aspect has to do with man's action, but an aspect of man's actions that he has no control over. Now, this sounds a bit contradictory. We have said that it has nothing to do with man's actions or anything, and now I'm saying that it has to do with man's actions. Rather, what I mean is that it has to do with the outcome of man's actions. This outcome might fall on you or any other person. So it is said that it is a matter that is out of our hands, but we initiate it on our own. Okay, so what it simply means is that man carries out an action, but he cannot determine the outcome of that action. If he shoots, he cannot determine whether it will hit the mark or not. If he throws an arrow, he cannot determine whether he will hit bullseye or not. Of course, he can improve his skill and things like that, but the outcome is beyond him. And this is where I want to mention something. There is this huge confusion about actions and success, and we live in this hyper-capitalist competitive world where everyone wants to succeed, and these so-called capitalists like to blame poor nations and poor people for their lack of wealth, that it's their fault. If you had done what Bill Gates and Zuckerberg did, you would have succeeded. It's an absolute lie. That's just what I'm going to say about this, because there are aspects of actions where the outcome depends on you. You cannot acquire knowledge by wishing it. You have to seek it. So the only way you acquire knowledge is by seeking it. Yes, but guess what? Your ability to acquire knowledge, your mental aptitude was not given to you by you, meaning you did not give that to yourself. You did not give yourself your mental aptitude, which means despite the fact that you acquiring knowledge depends on you seeking it, it doesn't mean you can determine the amount of time or tries, meaning effort, it will take for you to acquire that knowledge. You just have to do your own best, and you leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are things where you have to carry out, you have to do it on your own, you have to execute them. Then you wait for the outcome. Then you should expect an outcome. And there are aspects, which is where this issue of, where I say outcomes here and al-Qadaa comes in. There are aspects where you have no control over, meaning you doing something will not determine whether you get it or not. And you not doing anything will not determine whether you acquire it or not. So in any event, this is saying that man carries out an action, but he does not determine the outcome of that action. And now someone might say, what I just explained, it contradicts that. I just said that there are things, there are outcomes where you don't have to carry out an action, and you might still, the result might still fall onto you. Yes, there is no contradiction actually, because it is not necessary that you are the one carrying out the action, because you might carry out an action and it falls on you, or you might carry out an action and it falls on somebody else. If that's possible, if that's the case, then someone might carry out an action and it falls on you, or it falls on him, or it falls on another person, and you are just another person. So that's why it is said that man carries out an action and the outcome falls on him or another person. Meaning he cannot determine what comes next. And brothers, this is what al-Qadaa is. These two things, the law of the universe and the outcomes of action. That's it. That's what al-Qadaa is. Nothing more, nothing less. As for al-Qadr, it is simply the attributes of things. So it can either be the object attributes, meaning the attributes of a knife is that it's sharp, it can cut things. The attribute of fire is it can burn. The attribute of water is that it's not, its molecules are not concentrated. They are concentrated, but not as concentrated as ice. Okay, so it flows. It flows. The attribute of air is you can't see it, but you can inhale it, and things like this. That's what al-Qadr is. And the other aspect of al-Qadr is the vital energies, which is also attributes. The vital energies, as we mentioned at the beginning of this this whole series of lectures, is that is the instincts and organic needs. We have the reproductive instinct, the survival instinct, and the sanctification instinct. And we also have the organic needs. So the instincts, which is of three types, and the organic needs are all attributes that have been placed in us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if you look at all these things, you will see that they have nothing to do with man's actions. But man carries out his actions according to what they can offer. Meaning, if you look at what we discussed in Al-Qadr, you will see that the law of the universe does not force you to carry out an action. Just like I said, just because natural laws, or what we call the law of the universe, does not allow you to walk through a wall, doesn't mean you can decide not to run towards a wall and do that. And you can carry out that action to decide or not. But most people will not because it forces them not to, but because they know that it's just not possible. Law of the universe, and that's what it means. We submit to it, it dominates us. As for the outcomes of the action, and I'm discussing al-Qadaa again, as for the outcomes of the action, then it only has to do, then it has to do with the outcome of our actions. Whatever comes, we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because khayrihi wa sharrihi is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, you have done your best, but the outcome is with Allah. And you not being able to do it does not mean there won't be an outcome. Because this belief that what we do is the thing that determines the outcome is the whole confusion. And this is honestly it was created by the income of Western ideology, where it makes people believe that your so-called success depends on your efforts and your planning and things like that. How many people have planned more than you and I? How many people have executed their plans more perfectly, but the outcomes did not favor them? And how many people have done nothing but have better outcomes, if you're looking at it even from a very worldly perspective? That's because the outcome is not in your hands and it's not in my hands. It's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like everything else, we are only required to do our best. So going back to Al-Qadr again, Al-Qadr is nothing more than the attributes of things and our vital energy. So whatever is it we see on this earth, it has an attribute. And this is what we call it. And this is what in school we study in chemistry, actually, and biology. In chemistry, we study elements: helium, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, etc. We study all these things and we say they are elements, they have their attributes, they have they behave in a certain way. That's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them those attributes. So we, as it is always said, science cannot tell you how they acquired those attributes. But it tells you how those attributes behave and what they can produce as a result. The same thing with the vital energies. We did not decide to have the sanctification instinct. We didn't decide to have reproductive instincts. We didn't decide to have survival instincts. Nor did we decide to have organic needs. We found them there. And here is something that usually confuses people, but it's actually not. This issue of attributes of things is also law of the universe. It's also al-Qadr. This aspect where we say that al-Qadr is attributes of things, it's also al-Qadr. Yeah. And I think there will be quite a confusion here. But it's actually simple. Is that if you remember, we say that the law of the universe, this here, determines the nature of things, the way they behave perfectly. It's the same thing here. The attributes of fire is that it will always burn no matter what. Okay? The attributes of the survival instinct, for instance, is that man will always seek to survive. So these are also law of the universe. And this is just the whole topic of Al-Qadaa wal-Qadr that has been causing confusion for centuries. And inshallah, I will stop here. Next, when we come, inshallah, then we will go through the explanation in the book, and then we can see how, and I hope it will be easier then to understand the explanation that came in this book, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The room for questions and answers is open.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam.
So, if I got you clearly, what you're saying is, in the explanation of Al-Qadaa wal-Qadr, the punishment, is that a case? Given that if the explanation that the Al-Sunnah give in terms of what do you call them? That man's action is determined by man. So if he errs, then he gets punished for it. If he does well, then he gets rewarded for it. And so that shouldn't come in the explanation. Is that the case?
Okay. So as we said that that we will come to the issue of man controlling his action or not. But if, as you can see from what we explained about Al-Qadaa or Qadr, they actually have nothing to do with man getting reward for his action or not. Because if we look at Al-Qadaa, we will see that it only has to do with things that man cannot control. Now, him choosing to carry out an action is something else. Okay, and then another aspect of Al-Qadaa is that man initiates the action, but not the outcome. But they cannot determine the outcome. Him initiating his action, carrying out the action, is not the Qadr. It's the outcome that is the Qadr. Okay, so reward and punishment has to do with actions themselves, whereas Al-Qadr has to do with the law of the universe and the outcome of the action. Okay, Al-Qadr has to do with the outcome of actions and the law of the universe. Whereas reward and punishment have to do with your actions directly. So what we are saying is that they should not be confused. And what should not be confused is that you carrying out your action, the thing is there is inevitably interaction between human action and these outcomes. And what I mean by that is not that your actions influence the outcomes. No, it's not that. I'm just saying that, yes, man carries out an action which produces a result, but it's determining what the result is that man cannot do. That's why it is called Qadaa. Whereas the law of the universe, man completely has nothing to do with it. Well, it's not completely, because when it comes to outcomes, man has to carry out the action. But all we're saying is that him carrying out his action has nothing to do with al-Qadaa. It has to do with him deciding to carry out an action or not. Because deciding to do or not to do something, both cases have consequences. They produce a result. If a person decides to start a business and refuses to study, it has its results. But he cannot be the one he cannot determine the outcome. So when he decided to go into business and not to go to school, he was deciding to do something and not do another. And if he decides the opposite, which is to go to school and not enter any business, he is deciding to do one thing and not doing another. So whenever man decides to do something, he's actually decided not to do another thing. And if he decides, so it's and vice versa. Even if a person decides to be idle, that's meaning he decides not to do anything, he is actually deciding to do something. And that something is being idle, not doing anything. Now, the outcome of that is not in his hands. It's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, I did mention as a caution, there are matters that depend on you carrying out your own action. For instance, if you want knowledge, you seek it. But when it comes to things that are beyond that have to do with result, that has to do with results, then they have nothing to do with man determining whether what he doesn't want. So he can come. As for the law of being cut off from his actions, and what I mean by being cut off from his actions, meaning none of his actions has any. You understand? You understand what I mean? So al-Qadaa has nothing to do with giving you freedom to carry out your action or not. It has nothing to do with the freedom of you carrying out your action or not. It only has to do with the law of the universe and the outcome of your actions. You see, the outcome is not the same with the action itself. And if you're going to get all very philosophical, you can say the relationship between the outcome and the action and this and that, but just really unnecessary. As for al-Qadr, we say that it's the attributes of things and vital energies. I hope that's quite clear.
Yeah, I think sure. I think that, but the point which I also think that perhaps the Ahlul Sunnah also pay attention to is the fact that, which is a comment you made, because the consequences occasionally is dependent on the action. You can't fully dismiss the outcome from the action. Because I mean, that's why the man gets, for instance, if you slap a man, intending just to slap him, and then the person dies, you get punished for killing someone. And so because the outcome is directly tied to your action, I suppose.
Yes, this is true. And this is something I actually haven't explained, and thank you for bringing it up. Although we would have discussed it next week, inshallah. But thank you for bringing it up. Yes, if when we talk about outcomes of actions, we're talking about outcomes that you did not intend. Meaning, when I say you did not intend, is that they are outcomes you have no control over. Whereas, for instance, if you want to run a car into a house and you intend to do it, that's not al-Qadaa. So as you said, if one intends to kill with a slap and he slapped him and he dies, he killed him, he committed murder because he intended to kill him. But if he slaps that person with no intention of killing him and that person dies, that's Qadaa. Because he did not intend on killing him. Okay, he was not trying to kill that person. Just like a driver would be traveling from one place to another and then hit someone and that person dies. The driver, it can't be said that the driver committed murder or the driver killed him and or it was the driver's fault. Okay, because he was not. He was, of course, there are conditions. Was he driving at the right speed? Did he see the person coming into the road? And even if he saw him, did he see him at a time that he could have avoided the action? So I'm saying the outcome we are talking about here is where man has done his best, where you have done your best, and the rest you live. And that's what it means to say the rest you live to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning you have done your best, you have tried to avoid a horrible outcome, and still that horrible outcome came along. So you submit to it, meaning you accept it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you have done your best to avoid it. But of course, when a man hasn't taken care, he hasn't, it's like you're planning a project and you did not plan it, in the sense that you're going to carry out a project and you do not take into consideration the relevant factors and variables. If it fails, which it likely will, it's that person's fault. Okay, so we have this session and there is power and there's a possibility the power will go off, knowing that I still decided not to charge my PC. And when power did not come, and when the power went off and my computer has no battery, I cannot claim that, oh, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided because there have been power since morning. That's me being negligent, because I do know that here in this country, it's entirely possible in Nigeria for power to go off at any time. There's no notice. I have tried my best, unwanted outcome, so then I can't be blamed for what comes next because I've done so. But want us to understand is that that must, and still the outcome turns out to be different from his from what that man wanted, or even if it's the same with what he wanted, we should understand that these things, they are beyond man. And the best example is the issue of rizq, where man does his best, plans and executes the plan perfectly. There are actually people that believe it's this plan and this perfect execution that led them to this world. And it's absolutely wrong to say that, because no matter the amount of asbab, causes you have created, this is a matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has textually left to himself. So but in other matters that have no text that say, okay, man cannot influence them, then man does his best to avoid any unwanted and horrible outcome, and then he leaves the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we are saying is that we are not saying that man's action should not have consequences. Meaning, we are not saying that man's actions should not be punished or rewarded. We're just saying the subject of al-Qadaa should not have to do with whether you are rewarded or punished, because in this case, man has no control over them. I hope this is clear.
No.
Okay, is there any question or comment? Inshallah, we'll stop here and we'll continue next week from where we stopped. Jazakumullahu khairan for attending.
أمة واحدة دولة واحدة راية